Welcome to Wholeness in Motion Foundation video series. This is session 4, and the subject matter is our suspension system, our pre-sprung elastic suspension system, which is a way of understanding and describing how we are designed to be upright and vertical. So in the everyday parlance in the world, it's in the territory that people usually use the words alignment or posture. This is a different take, a different understanding of how we're made than the understanding that is the underpinning of posture and alignment. So let's play with this for a minute. Here would be in Wholeness in Motion how we might address this territory. So come to standing, or you could try this sitting, and just for a moment look around the space and actually see things, and you might even notice if you like it, so you're a bit engaged with the stuff in the space. You're not just faking, looking around like, oh, there is a leaf, how many branches are there of it? And then come to a gentle stillness and notice that the earth is right up underneath you. And we'll look more at what I'm talking about with the earth underneath us in the next video on gravity. And then be ready. We've done this before in the other videos. Be ready, like bounce a ball. Be ready to clap, to catch, to sing, to bring an instrument, to ski. Be ready to do something, and ready, not held or gripped, but just notice that everything's available and fluid to do that. And that is it. And just for a moment, compare that with if you were going that sensation and those instructions with bring yourself into good posture. So stand tall, do some adjustment to your shoulders, to maybe your sternum, think open. Put your feet in a certain position, get balanced, make sure you're balanced. Tuck your tail, do this. And just notice how available you would be to ski or to play a ball or something like that. And then come back to the suspension system model. I'm open in all directions. My bones spread side and front and back. I'm free to look around. I've got the earth comes up underneath me, is supporting me. I'm here, supported. Ready to move in any direction and be responsive. And just notice if there is a difference in you. And right now we will not be discussing all those differences, but for me, I know I feel quite different. Another way to play with this idea of the suspension system would be to utilize some of the tonal work we did in the last session on tone. So do this, collapse, do that shut down, and get to know that feeling of shut down. This is usually the feeling that people are in when they get postural instructions. Stand up straight, honey. So just do that, stand up straight. And feel that tone, especially stand up straight with a little, just add it like you're extra tall, more than your own height, get taller. And then back off of that and be ready to spring. Be ready to move. So that collapse, grip, free. You can play in it. There isn't one place to stay. We can just be alert to the effect of all of those. So the model of the suspension system, that is the premise that underlies how we relate and engage with our verticality in Wholeness in Motion, is from the work of David Gorman. He is an anatomy maverick genius, in my opinion. And he wrote the 3-volume anatomy book called Body Movable. And in all his work looking at human structure, he was trying to explain what is it that in one moment we can have this easy feeling like when you get off a massage table, and he'd come from an Alexander technique background where he'd finished an Alexander lesson, or all those kinds of moments where you're suddenly free and easy. Was that a little bit of magic someone did, or can that be explained inside our structure? Is there a way to understand ourselves that could explain that experience and that sensation? And indeed, as he went to the tiniest molecular work inside of the muscle fibrils, inside the sarcomeres, and looked at it in relationship to the flows of muscles, and how there were a whole set of the deepest interior muscles weren't about moving us, but actually about a resisting stretch and kind of springing us into our verticality. He saw our whole system as a tensegrity structure, as this internal suspended system, not suspended from the sky with a hook, but internally suspended. So let's look at a tensegrity structure before we bring that back into ourselves again. So you may have seen this. It's a toy, a tensegrity toy, and I believe that it's Buckminster Fuller first articulated, but some of you physicists out there could maybe update that if that's not accurate. But here we have rigid structures, the sticks, sprung together with more flexible structures. So the sticks are acting like spreaders, expanding, and the connective structures are creating the integrity. So we've got the pulling apart, creating tension on the flexible structures, and that kind of balance of tension is creating the integrity of the structure, and it can keep its shape, its spaciousness, keep remembering that word, in every angle. And that is a completely different model than a stacked model where things line up from the bottom up and the top down and things go into alignment. This idea of a tensegrity structure is that we are actually designed, evolved on this planet at this specific gravity. And in us, we have structures that act as spreaders, our bones, and a myriad of connective tissue fibers and musculature that work with the muscular, with the skeletal system and the muscular system together, and act like this internal tensegrity structure, so that there are parts of us like the head, or most of us in the front, the mass of us is kind of falling forward. So there's a whole bunch of musculature deep inside the spine that feels that stretch and resists it. All you have to do, if this is falling and I resist that stretch, I won't fall down anymore. And then there's a whole bunch of me going down to the earth, and the musculature that's feeling that pull down through the center of me is resisting up. And our deep musculature is wrapped around us to counteract the basic instabilities of our system. We have all this mass up over the ground, and it's quite unstable, which gives us tons of mobility. And the tensegrity system gives us stability through mobility. So as the upper me falls forward, there's lots of muscular here to catch that mass that goes forward, while the thigh bone is unstable backwards. So the musculature, the big musculature is in the front, and the deep ones we're talking. The lower leg is unstable in most directions, but because the way the thigh is, the musculature is in the back. So it's a flow of muscles like here on our front, back to front to back. And then there's another flow that goes front to back to front and through us. And so it's as if on the deepest inside of us, we have this double helix catching us, and there are also musculatures on the side, but for simplicity's sake, we're hung inside of this very responsive muscular web that works as a whole. You can name individual muscles, and there's some advantage to it, but very little, because most individual muscles work in harmony and connection with all others. So we speak of the web much more than I'll say, and the quadriceps are doing this, and the intersclepius are doing this, and we have to develop this and that. We're actually looking at functionally the whole web. So if you try this on for a minute, if you're standing here and you play around with having more pressure in your heel, more pressure, contact touching the ground with the toes. We stand on the ground, not on our feet, so more pressure into the earth on those parts of your feet. And then come to where you feel relatively, not perfectly, relatively in the center, right to left, front, back. And then you let that little bit of leaning happen. Feel how your system catches you. You don't have to tell any muscle what to do. That happens in our other than consciousness. And we're sprung into this uprightness, caught, as we allow the bones to spread and the musculature to do just enough to keep us in integrity. Then no matter where I go in space, things open to move. So there's no pressure in my knee, no pressure in my legs. I can walk without focusing forces in those parts. Bending doesn't hurt knees. How I bend does. If I press down, if I go down because I'm fighting gravity, then my knees have already started to hurt. But if I have this tensegrity structure, if I think of this opening in every direction, as I allow it, there aren't those pressures. And I realize this is not an opportunity to do the whole piece of work, but it's to give you a flavor of that language of opening and moving in each direction. And in the individual lessons that are always part of however you engage in WIM, we could look at specifically your life. So if you can't feel some of what I'm describing, your knees still hurt or you feel gripped, this is what we would do to help you understand that. So suspension is it's a way of understanding how we're upright that supports the goal in some ways of what is it that's useful to know so that I can do all the movements I want of life for as long as I can, for 125 years if I need to, barring injury and falls and all those things. And even if I have injury, I have to say from real experience and from working hard labor in a greenhouse 6 months a year, that this suspension system is what lets me, who's in my 60s, spend 8 hours a day bending and lifting and pulling. You know, I might be a little tired at the end, but not injuring. So it's incredibly practical, and it's rooted to making transparent that this is the premise, this is how we're designed, these are the strategies, feel comparisons, let yourself sense grip or fall, or there are various strategies that keep coming up through wholeness emotion, and then it's rooted to a very clear idea of what this is for. Is this making the next task, what I want to do, how I function, easier or harder? I can actually have that criteria and compare it. So I'm compressed, I'm held, I'm free. What serves my purpose better at any given moment? Again, we're not saying it's a truth, and we're not saying there's one way to be. And for me, this has been a huge liberation because for 20 years I spent deeply immersed in the postural and alignment model because that's all I knew in my dance training. And there's so many beautiful things. It saves so many people. It also created a quagmire for me. One was I got pretty good at certain aspects of it, and I found myself much more rigid and in some ways not even really able to feel because I had kind of lifted myself. And then, on the other hand, when that wasn't there, I'd see pictures of myself talking, and I'd be in this pulled forward thing. I was constantly either stiff, gotten a little bit stiff, or I was feeling like a failure because I wasn't doing this posture thing well. And something about all that seemed fishy, and I was not the only one. People I was working with in teaching, and friends and colleagues, there was this quagmire inside of posture and alignment that on one hand had me not feeling like that I was okay as I was, that I needed to improve, had me feeling less available to do things, and then maybe worst of all, put the authority on what's good for me in someone else's hands. And even worse for me was that when I was teaching, it was as if I was telling people what was good for them. And I really hated that. Like, oh no, put your hair here, do this, lift here, put your head there. All those kinds of specific instructions, as if using a few years of evolution, a few years of living life, of my frontal conscious mind, could tell my millions of years of evolution how to improve itself, how to do itself. So I'll leave that as it may. But for me, the suspension system was a huge relief, and the outcomes were 100 times better, leaving people with real choice and mostly, 90% sense of feeling of success most of the time. And me not needing to tell them what's useful for them, but helping them figure out for themselves what's useful to them. It's an entirely different pedagogy that feels to me is much more aligned with a world that isn't about domination and expertise, but one about awakeness and having access to our own compass. So all the things that are at the root of wholeness in motion, the suspension system allows to happen when the rubber meets the road in the middle of a lesson. So I hope that that's something that intrigues you and can be useful to you. And I guess my last really important thing that I haven't mentioned is that as someone who's spent 20 years teaching from there, I know that anyone teaching from the alignment posture point of view is really doing their best for themselves and for others, and always with good and kind intention. And I was too. And in the last 30 years working with this, it's just it's getting at everything that I wanted from that, but much easier and more alive and delightful. So this is just an invitation, and I hope you can play with it, or contact me, do WIM work, so that you can really test this out, because there's a lot more, as you might note, in it. All right. Thank you. Our next foundation video will be about gravity, because that is a huge part of what makes this suspension system work. Thank you.